Coming up, the official end of preseason is near. One last game to go. A bevy of positives coming out of preseason game number 2. How does it set the table on the offensive side of the ball? The wide receiver rooms, the backup running backs, and yes, that offensive line. We break down where we stand on the 53-man roster, who can still make headway this week, and ultimately, where does that practice squad come into effect? We break it all down coming up next. Yes, sir. It's OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where, of course, we are your hosts over here at Adam Armbrecht, breaking down the Brooklyn Nets on the Locked On Nets podcast and your New Jersey Devils on the Devils Puck Luck podcast. And over there, my friends, not the healthiest, but still wealthy, still wise, seasoned generational ticket holder, the voice of the people, Mr. Andrew Mackwitz. How are we, sir?
Yeah, I'm struggling through it, but the show must go on. And I'm a little under the weather today, but man, we got some different news and notes. We got to recap the game. I have to be here. We got to do this thing.
The show must go on. Yeah, still got it, buddy.
Wow.
When they kicked me out of that band back in the late 80s, I said, you guys are going to regret it. And one day when I'm doing a podcast,
you'll rue the day. You'll rue the day.
That's right. You will rue the day. I wish I had an opportunity in real life to use that expression. Friday night was the game, a second preseason game against the Carolina Panthers, a team that a lot of people suspect are going to be young and maybe struggling in this upcoming season. But a lot of best foots forward on that day. We're not going to talk about certain players when it comes to 53-man roster because they're locks to be there. But let's take that minute on the offensive side. Daniel Jones comes out. Darren Waller comes out. They run a perfect first series, everything that you could want to see from your key starters. They look crisp, and there's a lot of insights around the way this offense is going to run, but boxes checked over there, and you feel really good about being able to move on from that, getting that little tiny sample size that you're probably not going to see again until the regular season.
Yeah, you hear in practice about Darren Waller and Daniel Jones having a connection, him catching everything. You hope to see that continue. It did. Daniel Jones featured him early and often in that game. You can tell that he's going to be good for almost 10 targets a game, the way that this game plan looks like it's going to unfold for the Giants in the regular season. And Daniel Jones looked like he had really good pocket awareness, knew when to step up, knew when to use his legs, which is important. We mentioned it on Twitter and other places. Isaiah Hodgins has the crisp route running where you could see him get himself open because he just knows where to be. Even in the second series, talk about Jalen Hyatt. We see him use his speed vertically. There's no way that people are going to be able to match up safeties one-on-one against Jalen Hyatt because then they're really rolling the dice about him just blowing by whatever defender's there.
Yeah.
These are great things for the Giants to look at in the first couple of preseason games. It's encouraging to think that this offense, which ranked 18th in points per game last season, could move up a few spots. If it ends up being a top 12 offense, Adam, then you really start thinking about what this team's potential is.
And obviously no Saquon Barkley out there. We never expected him to play in the preseason games, but that's the big unlocker here for this offense as well. And I agree with you. I think this is a far more balanced, and you mentioned this over on Twitter the last couple of days, complementary weapons inside of the offensive system. So great sample size. It's what you want to see. Yes, we want it to be Daniel Jones that threw the ball to Jalen Hyatt, not Tyrod Taylor, but we still like the result there. And I'll even say, on Jalen Hyatt, a lot of great things we saw there, just in terms of his route running, right? The speed is there. But I think as he continues to progress and develop as a player, someone noted, man, he has some pretty long strides, but I don't even think he's fully using those strides yet. And that may just be specifically when you watch that one play where he kind of breaks it down to suck in the safety and then has clear grass in front of him on a 33-yard touchdown. But it's just like, remember, he's a rookie. He's still learning. So I think you'll actually see this get better as we go forward. So big steal for the New York Football Giants, noted by assistant GM Brown, who spoke glowingly and also got me pretty excited just to be a New York Football Giants fan in general.
Yeah, Brandon Brown, when he talks, you feel like you need to elevate your game because the intellect is there. And the way that he talked about Jalen Hyatt specifically, Adam, where he said they at Tennessee had a very, very specific way that they wanted to use him. And the way that he talks about it was brilliant because it talked more like that's what they needed him for, and he filled a very specific role. We may need him for more than that, or we may uncover that our offense requires different things that he also excels at. And it just opens up your mind to, You wonder why some guys fall in the draft. There's just undeniable talent with, the top 10, top 20 type guys. And then you start
Mhm.
thinking like second, third, fourth round and beyond. These guys may fill roles or a scheme or do something well that the team really needs. And that's exactly what Jalen Hyatt has shown already. And he's just scratching the surface as a rookie.
And I agree with you. And the other thing that it really brought to mind was this isn't a put down on any college level coach, but it's are you using him to the best of his ability? What do you need him to do? What does the college game dictate? Right? You do start to pigeonhole players into certain roles because at the college level, it's way easier. Hey, go burn, right? Be faster than everybody else, and we'll bomb some things out there to you. So it does come down to the GMs, to the scouting departments, to the coaches to identify a player and say, not just his skill set, but within our system, we can develop and utilize this player in a big way. So that looks like that's the way it's trending for Jalen Hyatt. When we think inside of here, so Brian Daboll met with the media earlier on Monday. That's when we're recording this. It'll go out about Monday evening. It should, assuming I handle all of my proper responsibilities afterwards. Talking on the offensive side, guys that didn't practice today: no Phillips, no Anderson, no Beasley, no Brightwell, no Sweeney, specifically on the offensive side here for practice. Didn't seem like anything too alarming by his accounts, but we will get to the offensive line there. We're going to do this in the fashion of who's going to be making this 53-man roster. We'll feather through this as we go along, and then maybe bubble players. The other note, we'll go offensive line here first, is that Ben Bredeson was playing some left guard, right? Was playing some backup center here. We're going to get to Glowinski in a second. And the indication to me from Daboll is love him, versatile, has experience at all those positions across the interior. Not a chance in hell we want him to be a starter because he represents like the safety valve and depth for this team. As we look at this 53-man roster and guys that need to prove themselves this week, offensive line, he's one of the guys that gets checked here and actually gets checked to me as a depth piece, at least at the moment.
Yeah, and even reports out of Monday's practice, Jordan Renan came out and said it might be a little unsettling, but they're still rotating around
Yeah.
Glowinski, Bredesen, and Azudu from left guard to right guard, back to left guard to right guard. It still feels like the Giants are tinkering to try to figure out what is the best combination, which is a little unsettling, as Jordan
Yeah.
Renan would say. Like, yeah, I'd like us to know who our five are, get some continuity for the next couple weeks, and be prepared for Dallas. But it seems like they don't know yet. Now, my question to you, Adam, is
Mm.
do you think that they have the optimal lineup already in their head? And this is all just like practice to make sure everyone can fill into different spots? Or do you really think that they're still tinkering to say, is Glowinski better on the left or the right? Should Bredesen be starting? Has Azudu done enough? Like, where do you think the Giants actually stand on the guard spot?
Yeah, I think, and they said, and because someone even asked Brian Dable today, are you going to be willing to rotate guards in different spots during the game as you did last year? And he said, yeah, whatever's going to get us the best opportunity to win. It was intentionally vague about it. I don't think they're going to want to approach the start of the season that way. That was out of necessity. They like to, if they did it, to be out of design going into this year. So when you talk about that offensive line, I have to look at it, at least in my mind right now, that to me, it's Thomas. I'm going to say that I think it's a Zudu to start. It's going to be Schmitz there in the middle, obviously. It's going to be Glowinski and it's going to be Neal. And then Bredesen is there because, again, he's the only guy here that represents versatility across all three of those positions. When they said they put Glowinski at left guard for some reps, it was the first time, I think, in a decade or something, whatever the number was, hadn't been there in quite some time. So to me, that's maybe speaking to, okay, what if Azudu struggles and we decide that Bredesen needs to be inserted? Well, where is he going to be best valued? Could Glowinski go over there if he had to, right? So you're going to get to scenarios where you need to do that. So I think it's good to see those reps, but that would be, do you agree that that's the starting rotation with your super sub being Bredesen, at least at this moment heading into the season?
Yeah, I mean, it's concerning because we've talked about this before on the show too. If you start Ben Bredeson and there's another injury to the interior offensive line, you may not
Right.
just be doing a one-for-one swap. You may have to move around multiple pieces, which really doesn't it doesn't help the offensive line have that consistency and continuity to it. I think they're toying with that idea internally, Adam. I think it probably is, if the season were to start tomorrow, Azudu and Glowinski at the left guard and right guard respectively. But Ben Bredeson has been playing well at the guard position, and it's really tough to be able to say, let's keep him off the field as an insurance policy when you're like, maybe we should just put our best players out there regardless and keep our fingers crossed that we don't have the injuries to the offensive line.
Yeah, so we'll have to see, because I think you and I maybe like disagree a little bit, right, on the idea of, to me, I want Azuda to be the guy at left guard, and if he isn't, then you pull the plug on him. If you reverse it and Bredeson either gets hurt or doesn't look as good, then you've already confirmed also that your young player isn't ready either. So still some question marks there easily, by the way. The one area, even coming out of that last preseason game where you said, still some things I could look at the offensive line and wonder what's going on there. Running game didn't look stellar in a lot of those opportunities. So let's then turn our attention here, coming up in a second, to the wide receiver room, to the running back room, to the tight end room, and just set the table here for this final week of practices as the preseason closes out. Okay, so wide receiver room is the most interesting to me right now just because of the sheer volume of bodies. Now, there's some obvious ones here, and we'll close out the episode by rounding out our 53-man roster in somewhat quick fashion. Who are the guys to you, though? Because let's just get beyond some of the staple starters. Who are the guys to you in the wide receiver group that can make some headway for themselves in this week of practice and the final preseason game, knowing that it's going to be a lot of the deeper depth guys? Is there anybody in that room that's making a push for a 53-man roster spot in your mind? Don't gild the lily on the total roster, but who are some guys you have an eye on?
Oh, good question, Adam. Well, the first question that I have, which may tease a little bit out of the 53 man, is would you consider someone like Sterling Shepard a lock to make the roster right now?
Mm.
Because if he is a lock to make the roster right now, that really diminishes the options of who else can make the roster from the wide receiver room. If you're saying his roster spot is up for grabs, or people might start on the physically unable to perform list, that
Mm-hmm.
opens things up to me in my mind. I think the name that really sticks out to me is Colin Johnson. I know the Giants liked him so much going into last training camp and preseason. Obviously had the year-ending injury, trying to get
Mm-hmm.
his career back on track. Has another couple of nagging injuries that he's working through right now. He's been in the building. The Giants like him. The question is there enough room in the wide receiver room itself, literally and figuratively, for him to carve himself out a roster spot?
Yeah, I don't know if in this moment right now, based on this preseason, if you told me go back to last preseason and then again had an injury as well, then if you said it then, I would have said, oh yeah, I'd like him to be in line to carve out that role. Based on the way they approach things, bringing in Cole Beasley, right? They went out and picked up a guy like Khalil Pimpleton last year. Mickens shows up on this roster this year, and it's all the same type of mold of player, which is to your point about the concerns around Robinson, around Shepard, right? Even around Beasley, who missed practice, didn't play last week. Like there's this little thing when it comes to older veteran players. I couldn't tell if it's, well, he already showed you he's more than capable. Don't worry about it. We'll casually say you have some injury concerns, or he's old. And that's what happens. You look good, but your body just can't do it. So in the Colin Johnson case, it's hard for me because I can't see the model. Like I can't see the model in the mold that he fits into as an insurance policy. Do I think he's a dynamic player, like potentially, and can have an impact? Of course, but you have to carve out a different role. And that's when I look at a guy like Bryce Ford-Wheaton. If we want to go back to last week's preseason game, Wheaton, and these are again in the reps that they were given, right? Khalil Pimpleton and even Mickens. But I was surprised because Mickens and Pimpleton, when they're out there playing, you got to look for the number, because I was having a hard time determining who I was getting excited about watching. They both Pimpleton had a couple of catches, like looked good in the reps he got. Bryce Ford-Wheaton bounced back from a disappointing first preseason game. I think I look in that direction, 53-man wise, practice squad wise, even. I start to look at the guys that are getting reps, because I just think that seems to be the way Joe Schoen and the Giants are built now, right? If you're showing me you can do it, that means you're earning the reps, injury or otherwise. If I can't see the reps, I can't say that you earned the role, even if you've been here for a couple of seasons.
Yeah, that's the tough part, is who is getting the reps. And right now, not Cole Beasley not getting the reps. Basically, if you think about it, he's sharing the same spot that Sterling Shepard is, where they would play in the slot. Now,
Right.
we think Sterling Shepard has the versatility to move around to a couple different wide receiver positions. But yeah, Cole Beasley not being out there doesn't help do him any favors, especially given that he came in late. He's injured early, hasn't really been able to get on the field. You've seen a lot of Jamison Crowder. He was out there again running routes, catching balls on Friday night. It's a really interesting room, Adam, because the first question is,
Yep.
are they going to take 6? Are they going to take 7 wide
Yep.
receivers? Is someone going to start on the pup list? Is someone not going to start on the pup list? Because all of these things are little variables that decide how you would construct this wide receiver room. It's not just create a list of 10 guys and rank them, right?
Right.
There
Right.
is
Right.
priority, and depending on who gets stashed away on IR, who does this, who does that, means the room could look completely different. Because I agree, Bryce Ford-Wheaton is another guy who has special teams abilities and
Yep.
looks big and athletic and is fast and is one of these gunners. He looks great in that position. Is that enough, knowing that he's far down in the pecking order right now behind some other more established wide receivers?
And that's why, as we're going to go ahead and turn our attention to our 53-man roster, a couple of notes here from Brian Daboll on the offensive side. One, he was asked about and regarded as a good question. Can't give credit to who the reporter was because they don't show him and they don't announce them. You just see Brian Daboll at the podium. But he said, as you're working through this last week, what are you more focused in on? Your starting 11s, or are they already set? And then you're thinking about who's making the 53-man roster. And Daboll said, it's a good question. It's both. Like everything is still fluid. Positions are still up for grab. And in that regard, the 53-man roster does get impacted, right? Well, who are my starting four wide receivers, my top four wide receivers, I should say, right? Who are those guys? Well, we feel like they're pretty established. Well, if they're confirmed, then who's the fifth guy? And based on the fifth guy, it's the sixth guy, the seventh guy, right? Like those things are so dependent on who makes it, who's healthy, and who you feel most confident in. And maybe that Shepard Beasley one is the most interesting because there's familiarity with Beasley. We know Shepard has had his injuries. That does seem to be living on the same page with one another. The other quick note, just from Brian Daboll here, was on the Scottish Hammer. Jamie Gillen, they said, hey, are you concerned at all about the fact that he still, has some struggles and, hits some wonky balls? He pushed it aside as being, hey, we're all trying to get better in camp. We're all trying to improve. We have confidence in him. We had confidence in him last year, too. The guy has a heck of a leg. It matters that you put the ball where it needs to be. It's just a footnote when we talk about special teams. So let's then talk 53, Andy. From the top down, you kick it off with the quarterback room here. This feels pretty easy, but remember, we can throw in practice squads as well. Who do you got in the starting 53 for Big Blue?
Yeah, so quarterback, it clearly is Daniel Jones and Tyrod Taylor. Tommy DeVito has looked great in his limited snaps. A lot of the beat writers have also said that DeVito coming in from the spring to now looks like a completely different quarterback. More kudos and flowers being given to the coaching staff for being able to develop some of these different players. Adam, keep in mind, they kind of have this like transition thing where you can have three quarterbacks active, but doesn't count towards doesn't count towards your 53-man roster because they don't want wide receivers playing quarterback in case of emergency. But it feels like they're going to do their best to put Tommy DeVito on that practice squad. And who knows? He's a development guy down the road. I think you and I probably agree in that scenario.
Yeah, I think it's fine to have him there. You can like the idea of like, hey, is he good enough, to be a backup in another couple of years? You're backup to Daniel Jones? I don't know. We'll see, right? But go ahead and develop him and continue to bring in another veteran because I don't expect Tyrod Taylor necessarily to be here after this season when his contract runs up. Running back room. So we're in agreement there. 2 spots locked up. Hopefully practice squad for DeVito. Running back room, I'll take the lead. I have it as Barkley. Breida has to be the backup because he hasn't seen the field at all. So it just means that they're protecting their safety valve for Barkley, whether we fully agree or not. And then I have Gray obviously making the 53, both because he's shown now this return value in the return game in the absence of Gary Brightwell. And I think he's a nice compliment, right? A north and south runner, be physical. We can talk about Corbin, but if it's me right now in this moment, I'd say that this is a week where Corbin needs to really show me something to say they're going to carry 4 running backs. Otherwise, I chop it down to 3, and I actually won't be shocked if Gary Brightwell is a cut candidate here just because he hasn't been healthy. You may have lost your special teams role, and you now have a new regime guy in Gray that seems like he is at least starting to carve out a role for himself.
Yeah, I mean, I've always also had the debate about Breida and whether or not he is that running back number 2. His yards per carry dropped last season. He does have some cap savings if he were to be released, but you need someone that's reliable sitting behind Saquon Barkley. You
Yep.
drafted Eric Gray. You can't have Eric Gray going in as the number 2 with no experience in case something happens to Saquon. Yeah, Gary Brightwell being hurt hasn't done him any favors. Eric Gray has shown the ability to handle kick return duties. They obviously like Eric Gray because they drafted him. This is Joe Schoen's regime. To me, I'm with you. I think Gary Brightwell is teetering on the edge of making this roster. I think the team would love to be able to put Jay Sean Corbin back on the practice squad. But yeah, I think you have to go with 3 running backs. It's the reason why you're paying one running back $10+ million is you hope
Right.
that you don't need to get to your 4-string running back.
And by the way, right, preference, I would like them to move on from Breida and save the money and spend it elsewhere. But this is what I think is going to happen, right? This is where I think these numbers are going. So we're up to 5 now on the offensive side. Wide receiver room, obvious guys that we know are going to be a part of this roster. You're going to be talking about Slayton. We're going to be talking about Hodgins. We're going to be talking about Hyatt. We're going to be talking about Paris Campbell. That's my easy top four automatic. Now, that doesn't mean that I can't sit here, at least in this moment, and say that I think Shepard healthy, yes, he's making this roster. Beasley, again, we'll talk about it. I'm going to go too crazy, but that's something to be discussed there. Where are you in terms of, I guess, do you have a top 6 that you think is clear cut here? Because for me, there's so much health. And then Robinson's making the starting roster, by the way, as well. Maybe it's pup list for him, but Robinson's in that group too. So I can get to 6 if I include both Beasley and Shepard as being cemented.
Yeah, so you just mentioned Wan'Dale Robinson. He's another person that I have locked into this roster, and I think there are 6 that are the top guys. And to me, it's pretty clear: Hodgins, Slayton, and Campbell, Hyatt, Shepard, and Wan'Dale Robinson are the 6. I think. So, Jordan Renan said today Sterling Shepard was unguardable again in practice. Yes, he was going against the twos. Yes,
He's healthy,
he's
baby.
going against backup cornerbacks, but we fall into this trap every year because he's a great guy. He's a great locker room guy. He says
Yep.
he wants to be a Giant for life. He really does mean that he wants to be a Giant for life. You see the burst of athleticism even after it's, some of it's been zapped by multiple injuries. But if Sterling Shepard is healthy, he has more upside than a guy like Cole Beasley, than a guy like Jamison Crowder. And he's a fan favorite. It's really hard to not think that Sterling Shepard is almost a lock, if healthy, to make this roster.
That's what I agree with. So at least in this moment, I'm going to say that Beasley does not make this roster. I think that he was brought into camp as an insurance policy. He's a veteran. He's experienced. I think it's all great. But if Shepard's going to be healthy, he's a better player than Cole Beasley is. Just on like for like, and at least he's been around here. He's known the system, and we all know the hype machine that he was last year, even after going down with that injury. I will assert that I think Bryce Ford-Wheaton does make this starting roster based on the gunner value. Check out tomorrow's episode when we talk about the defensive side of the ball and a guy that I think could be on the bubble to not make the roster. You do the hard math researching roles and where this could come into play. I think that he's shown out in special teams. If he can just have another good week of practices and maybe show, again, first and foremost, special teams value in the final preseason game, and then catch a couple of consistent balls, then you're talking about a guy that has some size, and you think about him as your Hodgins, your Slayton. You want to still have some bigger bodies there because otherwise you will start. It doesn't mean it's a bad thing, but you'll be running a lot of small wide receivers. Maybe that's okay. Like we're not. I used to be 3 years ago. I wanted everyone to be 6'9", right, and monsters on there. You have Darren Waller now, so it can look different in that regard. So we'll have to see how that plays itself out. Do you agree? Just quickly, do you agree on Bryce Ford-Wheaton maybe making the roster, or do you think he's practice squad?
Yeah, I think he's got a shot at making it. I think that the Giants also have to really think about whether or not, if he doesn't make the initial 53, if another team would be willing to put him on theirs, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
that's
yeah.
also a consideration. Who would get scooped up? Who can make it to the practice squad? I think Bryce Ford-Wheaton has the best chance out of the Mickens group and Khalil Pimpleton, just because of his size and versatility on special teams, though.
And I'll add in that I think Pimpleton should make it back to the practice squad because he's the guy that's in the mold. Again, back to the Cole Beasley thing. Pimpleton is young. There's some upside there, whatever he's going to end up being. In the next 2 weeks or the next 6 months, Cole Beasley could officially retire and be done, right? So I think you always want to be thinking upside with some of these moves. So in that regard, I'm going to plug in. That means I plug in 7 onto my wide receiver room with the return man gunner. And that puts us up to, at least puts me up to 12 now coming through. Tight end, Waller and Bellinger. What do you see beyond those two? I mean, those are obviously the guys. Are we getting a third one here? My vote is for Lawrence Cager, though there's been some speculation that once they got Waller, it kind of changed the dynamic value that is Lawrence Cager as a field stretching tight end.
Yeah, I do still think that Cager shows enough offensive capabilities that he has to be on this roster. I think the Giants do take 3.
Yep.
I think Cager makes it. I think that they're going to try to put at least one of the other guys, whether it's Myrick or Sweeney, onto the practice squad. So
Yeah.
I'm going to say that there's 3 tight ends that make this, with one kind of, in case of emergency on the practice squad. Because remember, there's a lot of like 12 personnel and 2 tight end sets that the Giants are going to run. You have to have that insurance ready to go on the practice squad. So 3 on the roster, 1 on the practice squad for me.
Last but not least, it's the offensive line, man. Graham Gano is going to be put on the offensive side of this, including special teams, so you can add him in there. We have 16 guys on the offensive side, including our gunner, including our return man. Now the offensive line. Okay, so it's Thomas. We don't have to debate the starting, but Thomas, Uzudu, Schmitz, obviously Glowinski, and Neal. There's your starting five. Bredeson is number 6. In this moment right now, I don't know another way to say it. Matt Peart is going to make this roster just by the fact that he's being played with consistency as a member of that second unit, right? Now, for better or worse, he's flashed some good things. He's shown some bad things. I think that he's maybe in the mix, but do you have any conviction? I mean, really, do you have any conviction about anybody after that top 6? Because I honestly don't. There's a world when these cuts come around the league, you could see wholesale changes in terms of the depth of this roster for the Giants beyond guys that are young and they want to have there to continue to develop.
Yeah, I don't think that the 53-man roster is going to be set when they announce it. I think that there will be more changes. It could be multiple offensive linemen from other that are on other teams' rosters today that end up being on the Giants 53. I would say Tyree Phillips probably has the best chance of the other offensive linemen that you've mentioned to make this roster, specifically because we've seen Wyatt Davis struggle. We've seen Corey Cunningham struggle a little bit. That only leaves Matt Peart literally, and Tyree Phillips as the 2 offensive tackles that would be backing everybody up. You have to have at least 2 offensive tackles on the roster behind Neal and Thomas, given the injury history. So for me, yeah, I think Tyree Phillips and Matt Peart make the initial roster, which is crazy because it's almost kind of like you're looking around the room saying, well, I guess you're coming with us, jump in the boat. But how do you feel about Phillips being there?
Yeah, it makes sense. You said 26 years old. Now, again, this is what I don't know is I can say this very easily about Peart, who's also 26 now, by the way. Like, just as a reminder, he's pretty far down the road to be talking about, oh, can he maybe figure it out? He always said his arms were long. Turns out it's a problem for him. He can't figure out the way to tuck those things in and use them effectively. What I don't know is it all shakes out and there's other bodies available. Where is Phillips in the new hierarchy when you go get another guy? I think he's fine. He's also 26. And maybe this is the only thing where, like, we talk about practice squad. What I expect when you look at the offensive lineman, you can think about, McCathan is another interesting one. Again, had some injuries here in this offseason as well. So where does he land? Maybe through the practice squad with relative ease. There's not a lot of other young names here. Like, they went with basically veteran-ish or in-house guys, all 26, 25, 28, Devery Hamilton, 25 as well. So this is where I think the turnover is very easy. It's very easy to walk through this and grab 4 other bodies and then piece this together, because we're talking about 7, and you're only, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, 7 offensive linemen. You're more confident in Phillips than Peart, but you're not incredibly confident in either. And I don't think you wouldn't hate having 8 total offensive linemen going to the regular season.
Keep in mind they will have at least 8 on this roster. We haven't mentioned Shane Lemieux, but he's probably like the in case of emergency break glass across wherever on the offensive line. So like,
I think Shane Lemieux is a cut candidate. I think he could be gone.
Well, I agree, but based on his performance, you would think that. But the fact that there's no one else
But the
in the
fact that
room that
nobody
would
else,
take
yeah.
the chair
But he's
that
still
he would
playing.
be,
He's still playing.
so like he's still there by default. And so,
Yeah.
the Giants may take up to 9 offensive linemen because they're still trying to figure it out, Adam. I think we feel confident that about 6 or 7 will make the roster initially, but who knows what those last 2 or 3 roster spots are going to look like after the 53 man is announced.
How about this for a slogan? 9 and refine. You see what I'm saying? You take them all with you, and then you slowly start cutting off limbs. This is going to be one that I do not think at the end of the day we're going to know anything about until the end of this week, until the cut down day comes. Then all of a sudden you're going to hear it. I'll be very curious to see how quickly some cuts might get made, depending on practice squad or otherwise, to make sure that the Giants are on the front foot of being ready to pursue other players and bring them in to the locker room. Ironically, we haven't heard a lot about visits this offseason, right? And that's, I think, mostly because if you're decent enough to be playing the NFL, you're on a roster right now. So you're waiting for the numbers crunch from somewhere else. It puts me at 24. You may be a little bit lower depending on your wide receiver room. And technically we could be the same if I said only Phillips or Peart actually makes it through here, knowing there's going to be more additions. That includes Gano. We know Gray, maybe Bryce Ford-Wheaton as the gunner and the return man. 24 spots, 53-man roster. We're already, you double that up, and you're only talking about having some real depth positions of about 8 or so going into the regular season when we talk about defense next time around.
Yeah, 20. If you think about it, Adam, at the end of the day, we've mentioned this before, year after year. When we get to this time, there's really only 5, 6 roster spots that you feel are up for grabs, and a lot has to do with: Are we taking that extra tackle? Are we taking that wide receiver that also has special teams control?
Yeah.
Are we taking an extra cornerback? Who starts on the PUP list? Who has injury concerns that might need to start on IR? All of those differences are the way this roster gets constructed. But really, we're talking about 5 guys at varying positions, depending on how Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll want to do this.
And don't forget here too, man. By the way, first of all, that Joe Schoen was a plunderer of the waiver wire last season, right? Very active in a way we hadn't seen the Giants organization be in years. But as it stands right now, 16 practice squad positions. When we think about the post-COVID era, I have it as DeVito, Corbin, Pimpleton, Johnson, McCathan, and Davis. Those would be my 6 guys going through to the practice squad here from the offensive side of the ball. There's maybe another name or two there. We'll talk about this as we get to the end of the week again. But offensively, so that's 6 occupied, right? How are you going to fill out the rest of this? And then how many bodies will rotate over potentially to continue to make room? So next time up, it will be the defensive side of the football. All the same conversations we've heard about how Wink Martindale views the secondary. Does Brian Daboll agree? What about the inside linebacker spot? Some real positive notes potentially around Oshane Ximines and where his role is going to lie, and improve depth, right? That's what it's always been about here. So you get us over on YouTube at One Giant Podcast, on Twitter at One Giant Podcast, at AndyMac214, and at Adam Armbrecht, and wherever you get the podcast needs fulfilled, because this is it, my friends. We are down to the final wire. Aaron Rodgers will be playing this week, probably. We don't give a crud. We don't have to go anywhere. We stay at home. We prepare for the regular season. And until that moment, as Andy Makowitz would want, need, and nay, demand the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.